Welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rose podcast. I'm your host today, Valentino Stoll, and we're joined by a very special guest, Scott Werner. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us why you're Ruby famous here.
Yeah, Ruby famous. I wish. I hope someday. Thanks for having me, Valentino. It's super exciting to be here and be a part of this. So I'm here. I'm the CEO and founder and co-founder of Sublayer, where we're building a self-assembling AI agent framework in Ruby, and kind of supporting tools and infrastructure for to make something like that possible. And I've basically been programming with AI and Ruby and we were just talking earlier, basically exclusively trying to get AI to write all my code for me and not me actually write the code. And primarily Ruby.
That's awesome. So just so we're clear, you're talking about Sublayer is the project?
Sorry, yes. Sublayer is the gem. Sublayer is the gem. And so, it's, it said, they've been describing it as a self-assembling AI agent framework. And kind of what I mean by that is that each of the components that we've built are designed so that it's easy for an LLM to generate new additional components that you might need. So the framework is very minimal, and it's really about kind of defining the conventions, the interfaces, and then kind of letting you loose to expand on that for whatever you want in your application.
I'm super curious here. Like, where do you start something like that? Like, how did you get involved in this? Right? Like, how do you just stop coding?
It was tough. I think a lot of us were really inspired when we saw GPT-4 come out, and people using ChatGPT and posting videos of, I threw this prompt into ChatGPT, I copy and pasted the code into Xcode, and I have a running app, and I've never coded before. And saw that and immediately was like, oh, well, those people are going to want a way to add functionality and modify that software over time. And kind of realized that a lot of the stuff that we do in XP around like TDD and the different refactorings we do lend themselves really well to working with LLM. So breaking things out into small pieces, the simpler request you have for the LLM, the more likely it gives you something back that's good. And also kind of had this conversation with people of like, you would be mad at me if I gave you a 1,000-line PR, but at least you could come over to my desk and yell at me, right? If you got a 1,000-line PR from ChatGPT, that would be a big problem. And so kind of with that line of thinking is where we kind of started our journey.
That's really funny, and I just think of the costs associated with that too, for something that you don't want.
Right.
That's really cool. So I've definitely checked out Sublayer. I've used it to generate specs because I don't like writing specs. I'm not a test-driven person, but I do drive tests. So I'm more of a backwards test-driven developer, whatever you would call that. And so I use it. Yeah, I have a little script that I run Sublayer, and I say, "Hey, generate a RSpec test for this Ruby file." And for the most part, it does pretty good.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, so I love the kind of syntax for just like, hey, here's a generator, use this prompt to do it. It's super cool.
Thanks.
So why don't you give us like the high level, like, how does this all work, right?
Yeah, a little bit of background on like how and why it works is we started calling it promptable architecture, but the core idea was that there were going to be patterns, styles, ways that you build your application that lend itself well to LLMs taking a short request and giving you something back. And some of the things we started out with things we kind of already know of, clear interfaces, single responsibility principle, loose coupling, and kind of came about those through reasoning of it's going to be much easier to add code to your app if you can just drop that new file in rather than have to update a whole bunch of other different files. And other things like having these conventions that you can throw into the prompt, and the LLM will just believe you that that's your convention and follow it. um, and so that's been a lot of kind of our trial and error, figuring out what are these patterns, how are we going to structure our applications differently to take advantage of this. And so the one of the main things around the sublayer gem is every single component is very loosely coupled, that you could have 100 generators, you could have 1,000 generators, and they won't affect each other. And so you can one of the things that we've been toying with is like, maybe don't repeat yourself, or duplication in your code base isn't that bad. If it takes in the docs, you can see that you can generate a generator in like 10 seconds. uh Maybe it's not that bad if you and I both work on the same story, if it's us just describing it and getting the code, and it doesn't affect anything else in the code base. So there's promptable architecture, and so like that's been kind of our drive for this gem. And one of the things that we found works really well with that is that you really only need to give the LLM one example to generate something new, and so generate a variation off of that, which is where our kind of main tool Blueprints comes in. And basically what it does, which I think is has been pretty common experience from a lot of the developers that I've talked to, that 9 times out of 10, when you're working on a new user story, there's somewhere else in the code base that you do something similar, or there's a pattern you probably want to reuse. So you go, you look at that file, you repurpose some of the code, maybe copy and paste, and keep the code base very similar to what you're doing, which we kind of realized is a manual human version of RAG, which I made a joke to somebody that like my development style is retrieval augmented generation. I'm very good at Googling and looking around the code base. And it was kind of mostly joking, but then kind of took a step back and was like, actually, maybe there's something to that.
That's really funny. I never thought of it like that, but yeah, we're just doing RAG.
Right?
That's
And
funny.
so realize that you can actually kind of operationalize that. And one of the things that I think for you join a new team, and what takes so long to ramp up is that experience of, oh yeah, when we run into that problem, we do this pattern over here that's in this file on this line. But like you only get that from months, years of working on that team, that intuition.
Right.
Whereas you index these things, you put them in a vector database, and you query them, you can find them. And I we built that. We originally, actually, on the sublayer gem, thought we were going to build a whole bunch of different components and generators and stuff. But on our product planning meeting one Monday, we had we basically thought we were going to do about this much work this week, and had the idea of maybe we'll just generate one of these generators. And then a whole week's worth of work was done in a day. And it was like, take a step back. What did we just kind of like discover? So like, we found like building in that method, building in this method of like very loosely coupled components, small components, can be very powerful and quick.
I didn't realize that you have a list of predefined blueprints on the site. That's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yes, that's
go ahead.
yeah, that's super cool. I was gonna say that this mentality makes so much sense, right? Like I feel like I've been at places before where they've had just like generators in general, like Rails generators, right?
Mhm.
Where okay, you just like want to start up a new Rails app, like you use a generator. Like you want to create a new model that has all of the conventions, you use a Rails generator for that. Like uh, it definitely has helped, like in a consultancy, for example, like where you have all this boilerplate stuff that you just want to build off of. It's like, well, you use the pre-existing stuff, and then at least you have the shell there, and it's all hooked up and wired correctly, and then you can build off of that. But this is like the next step after that, right? Like, because then you can then start filling out the stuff in that boilerplate, right, to adapt to whatever it may be,
Right.
which is really cool. Um, and so, like, how well does it work, right? Like, I think that's, like, maybe, what a lot of people hesitate to jump into all this with, right? Like, uh, okay, so you have all this source material for it to use, like, isn't it just making mistakes still?
So it can actually, one of the things that I've kind of realized and been trying to figure out how to describe, right? But it's almost like by intentionally designing your classes and interfaces a certain way, you can almost like target the hallucinations to where you want them. Which, it makes mistakes, but they a lot of times are mistakes in the style that you would probably want anyway. Which I know doesn't really make sense, but like, so in the
Yeah,
actually,
what
I think
wait,
one
what do you mean by that?
so like, well, one of the things, if you go ahead and generate something on the docs site, you'll see that we have kind of this idea of an LLM output adapter, and right now it says there's a symbol for single string. So we're basically the simplest generator you can make is, here's a string. I'm gonna send a prompt to an LLM, and I want this specific string back. And like you said, like your example is the string could be our spec tests for some Ruby code that I've got. But if you ask it to build a generator that maybe gives you a list of uh, you know a list of refactors to make in that Ruby file, it might hallucinate that it needs an LLM output generator that generates a list. And while that might not exist, it'll still be in the conventions and the style of the library, which might exist, but also might point to, okay, well, here's the next feature we need to build. We need to flesh out what it means to get a list back. And so having those spots where there's nothing different from the base example to the new example you're trying to make, but the places where it's different, you can basically design your code so that those are the pieces that change. Output adapter might be a little more complex. The thing that I think you run into a lot is it just generates a new prompt for what you're trying to do, and doesn't touch anything else in the rest of the code. And so I'm thinking about it like I'm targeting the hallucination to that prompt or to the initializer rather than anything else in the code base or in the file.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, I have so many questions around the blueprints aspect of it. Uh, and I mean, I guess, like, where does somebody even get started? Like, is blueprints a good place to get started with the code generation aspects of it, or is that like a first test the waters with sublayer, and get used to the generators aspect of it? Like, where do you suggest somebody, like, that's, hey, I have got a team of people, we have a conventions in place, we want to
Mhm.
start adopting this process. Like, where do you start?
So yeah, I guess one place you can start. We just you saw on the site we just rolled out some new functionality where you can sign up, you can start to put some code examples in privately and start to generate from them to see how it acts. And that could be a great place to kind of start to play with promptability, which we've got a whole bunch of features we're going to roll out, kind of being able to score or point out areas where where it might make the code more promptable. Um, and so that's one aspect if you're curious about playing with your own code. And then on the sublayer docs, we actually, and I'm sorry, this is very meta, but we've actually created this interactive docs product, which we're going to be rolling out as well, where it's live in our docs, where you can come and go to any of the components. We have generators and actions right now, and see it in action. Just write in what you're trying to do, and it will give give you reasonable code. There might be some things, depending on what you're trying to do, might not be implemented yet. But one of the things that we're doing, if you go to the running, there's a guide on the left about running a local LLM with llama file. And what Andrew on our team does is actually, in the demo of setting it up, go to the doc site, generate the code for the demo, runs it on the video. So I'm sorry, we're
That
doing
is
a
so
lot
cool.
of
I know.
cursive version.
I was on earlier because I had looked at blueprints a while ago, and I hadn't seen Sublayer's latest stuff, and this is so cool. Yeah, you just go onto the site and you can like, yeah, just generate this stuff. It's so cool. Sorry if we're inflating your bill here, but it's maybe why it's there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like, definitely local inference is, a hot topic, and people are trying to, it's getting faster, and MacBooks are running it quicker. Um, is that something that you recommend people start with though? Like, is it fast enough to like make like the development flow smooth?
It's not yet. I would probably recommend starting with something like I think for some of the stuff that we're doing, $5 in OpenAI API credits can kind of help you get started. I think Google's has a free tier for even Gemini 1.5 Flash, which is super fast. We're using some of the models on our site, and you can also just go and play with stuff with private blueprints. For the local models, I kind of do think that's where it's probably going, for at least a lot of stuff. The problem, I think, the prohibitive thing about that is that you need a very powerful laptop to really be able to run the local models fast enough and powerful enough to actually get good results back. So
Yeah.
like $4,000, $5,000 MacBook Pro, or $5 into OpenAI API credits.
I remember I first saw the first open models, and I go and I install on my Raspberry Pi, because I'm thinking, oh yeah, like I'll just throw everything on a chain of Raspberry Pis, and it turns out you can't really like spread inference like that. It's not really there yet, and it's also super slow on anything, like even on a nice M1, right? So like, uh, it's kind of funny. Like you sit there and you're like watching. It reminds me of the old days of like waiting for an image to load on dial-up or something, right? Like you're waiting
Right.
for the sentence to complete.
I
Uh,
know. Yeah,
so
and I think it also, the risk you run is that it gives you the wrong impression. Like if you're just getting started, it's definitely good to throw $5 at some of the like frontier models, like Claude 3.5, GPT-4o, or Gemini, just to see what's possible. Because you can get the wrong impression if you're like, oh, this llama thing just like went off the rails and started talking about something unrelated, right?
right. Yeah. So I'm interested in like, have you found like certain models perform better for like certain tasks like related to code generation, or are there ones that are specifically better at generating Ruby code, or like generating certain kinds of Ruby code? Um, or even just like, are there certain tasks with code generation, like generating the specs for X, or something like that, where some models just do a better job than others, or is it kind of like just use any one of the top ones?
I My opinion and my approach is kind of really just use the top ones, because those are going to be the slowest, most expensive, worst models we're ever going to have again. It's just getting better and it's just scaling up. So like getting used to what's possible, and even if you run into an issue, like it's more about the UX and like, what is this, what does this imply if you can do this? I was talking to somebody about, remember when everybody's like, oh, AI image generation is never going to work because it keeps giving people seven fingers. And like, I can't remember the last time that was, part of the conversation. But it was all about like, here's a great way to generate an image. Ignore the hands for now.
Oh, that reminds me. I saw recently. Some university has the third thumb, uh, where you can actually like you use your feet to like you like to get like another thumb like prosthetic on your hand so that you can like hold stuff while you're like doing something else with one hand.
Mhm.
Like, they show peeling a banana with one hand. Like,
That guy's clearly AI generated.
oh my gosh, it's so funny.
But I guess to your point, and actually one of the things we've been trying to figure out the right way to present this, and maybe it'll come out as something interactive on the Blueprints site. But we've found that different attributes or different like different attributes of code quality that we've talked about for a long time uh, are actually kind of quantifiable now. Where one of the experiments we were running was having really descriptive good names and then generating off of that blueprint that you know GPT 3.5 did really well. When you made those names worse or less descriptive, it had a harder time figuring it out, but GPT-4 could. And so like that kind of that follows a lot of the scaling for the other models as well, where if you give it an easier problem to solve, it can solve it, but as soon as that problem gets harder, you need a more powerful model, which I've been testing out with some people. Like, we might be able to put a dollar value on technical debt because it costs you $1 per thousand tokens versus 10 cents per thousand tokens.
That's really funny. Outsourcing the jobs we don't want to do
Right.
to AI. It's all a cost per token at this point.
Right. It's always been.
That's an interesting idea. Like, definitely refactoring makes a lot of sense. I have a special GPT I made like that has a bunch of resources that I've collected over the years at its disposal to like help me refactor stuff specific to Ruby, and it works great. And having that extra knowledge base like is awesome. And I'd use it all the time just for like rubber duck sessions, right? Which I know the next step would be to then have it actually change the stuff, which I haven't spent the time to do. But like now that you've made it so easy with sublayer, I'm definitely gonna revisit it because that's definitely a task where like you could just say, hey, like generate a pull request for me, like and all the GitHub APIs are there. Like it could use it as disposal. Like, have you played like with tool usage in that way yet? As far as like the sublayer connection.
Yeah, and actually, I guess even to that task is kind of the where we see things going. That uh, you know, we're kind of looking at it like those kind of automations. Once you have that LLM and you have an easy way to take get some data, send it to an LLM in a specific way, and then get something structured back, you can build things with that. And you can build things with that very quickly, like that. Take these refactoring or these suggestions, make a pull request, or kind of anything you can think of. We've been toying with one idea where it kind of sits in our video chat for our planning meeting in the beginning of the week. That watches the video, manages the transcript, analyzes the transcript, and then anytime when somebody asks a question about a story and then you get an answer and then you forget to put it in the story, and then like a few days later, like, what did we decide here? You can just build an automation to kind of pull that out and put that in the story for you, and like that's a super quick task that doesn't take that much work anymore, right? And so, very long-winded way of saying we've explored tool usage, but I think we're looking at it a little differently than how the providers are uh, offering it. Um, you know, we absolutely rely on function calling, but only for like the structured output aspects of it, and relying on things that we're good at and things that we can do deterministically and reliably, which is call APIs and uh, you know pull make requests and make get requests and make post requests, edit files locally, that kind of thing. um, but it matters to like get the parameters that you're going to send to those APIs, and then we can do that deterministically. But like have the LLM do what it's good at and have us do what we're good at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Uh, do you see it more of like moving in the way that kind of GitHub is pushing with like configuration steps, or is it like, I'm curious if you've played with like the opposite of like the object oriented aspect of like, okay, here's a prompt and it can have all these extra functions and stuff wrapped into the code aspect versus like the configuration outline where, right, where it seems GitHub's going that way to fit better into their CI structure, to be honest, right, where you just have this YAML file and then it has prompts and can perform actions and stuff in it in that way. uh like, where does that flexibility more advantageous in like putting it in your code versus like in something like a configuration file?
That's a good question. I we were definitely coming at it from a different perspective. I think a lot of the multifunction calling, the GitHub workspace, are very kind of conversation driven, and so you have those functions that are structured ways for it to get more information to do the next step in the conversation, which can be powerful, can be very powerful. And I mean, we've seen a bunch of examples of the power that is possible. Um, but I think from maybe this is just the thinking, wishful thinking about the future of software engineering, that a lot of the principles that we've found while building, while not exactly right when working with an LLM, still matter. And so, one thing that I'm nervous about and why I haven't really gone the route of like multiple different functions for it to choose from is kind of the same reason why it's bad to have multiple, or it's bad to have a dozen parameters in your function, right? There was a quote that's something like, if your function has 10 parameters, you probably forgot one. That like a lot of those things, while folksy and kind of intuition and not like backed by any science, really, I don't know, still feel right to me. I still feel like you want to know that like this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, even if there's some fuzzy non-deterministic thing happening here.
Yeah, I agree with that. uh, I'm personally against the step by steps with LLM usage in general,
Mhm.
mostly because like you kind of want observability into that, uh and kind of like a way to intercept those steps. Like, as an example, I see like the usage over time starts to become more like reactive than it does like input output. So like, especially once you start using agents more, or things that are like can communicate with each other, it becomes like an observability thing, right? Like you end up having things that are watching, what is happening and can help redirect, right? If things start going wrong or interrupt. When you have that step by step process, it starts to make it harder uh, to change that, right? Because
Right.
it's got the code flow, and like, okay, well, you tell it to go to a different point in the code flow, like then it's like instruction jumping. Like, what are we back to C again, right? Like assembly. Like,
Right.
I use Ruby so that I don't have to know assembly, right? Like, I
Mhm.
think like Aaron Patterson's notoriously known for his joke, like, I do assembly so you don't have to, right? Like, uh, and so I see, the prompt usage kind of going in that direction too, right? Like, people write natural language and it does stuff for them, right? Like, that's the whole driving force of all of this. Is like, you know, we had like a product manager come in and make some changes to get better outputs, right? And like,
Mhm.
then our end users see the result of that, and like very specific, tweaks like general people can make, right? Like, I work at Doximity, and it's like a social network for physicians, and they go on the Chat GPT and they use Chat GPT to like solve problems for themselves, right? Like,
It's
they'll go
amazing.
and they'll generate like a denial appeal letter for some insurance provider, and they just like then they use it, right? And so they use natural language to make that happen. And
Mhm.
like, obviously, like they have some issues, like they have there's a lot of hand holding there, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and and so, like, the whole point is, like, to help drive people to use the natural language, and then us as developers are, like, to introduce, like, the advances of, like, extending it, right? Like, okay, ChatGPT, all these models, like, yeah, they give you text, like, well, because of that, you can have it generate any number of things because we're coders, right? Like, we
Yeah.
can start pipelining and obfuscating that, you know, input output that the LMs give us to mutate it in different ways, right?
Yeah.
The users don't have to see that, right? But they could still give it the same inputs that us as developers would even give it, right?
Right.
And so like that's where I see like, all right, we got to get away from this like, all right, step by step instruction. Like, that's a programmer like mentality, right? Like, we're starting to the design evolution is going to be really interesting to watch for developers, I think.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
curious. I'm curious, like what your thoughts are on that aspect. Like, where do you see like the design driving force of a lot of this stuff moving?
So my previous startup was actually a prototyping tool for voice apps, and so this was like right as Google Home and Alexa were coming out. We built a tool for prototyping out different conversation flows, and that same thing of step by step, back and forth kind of conversation. And one of the things that we kind of realized is that conversation is kind of just like one modality. And we got acquired by Adobe, built that into XD because we, firmly believe that, you want multiple modalities for inputting information to a machine. Sometimes it's voice because you're in a, you know, your hands are busy and you can't actually press a button, or you're cooking or something. But other times you're on the subway and like asking asking your phone for your bank account information is probably not a great idea, but like pressing the buttons on your phone is probably fine. Um, and so all that being said, I think where things are going, I don't think we're going to throw out like the last however many decades of UX research that we have into like interfacing with machines. That there are going to be a lot of times where you have buttons and forms to that people can understand and intuitively grasp, right? Like, can you imagine going to Facebook and having to like write a SQL query or ask like the Facebook bot to add somebody as a friend versus just clicking the add friend button? Um, and so I think it's going to be a mix, even if behind the scenes there is going to be this non-deterministic natural language API that uh, that we've been using, but like from a user standpoint, not requiring them to understand the right way to prompt. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, prompt. I hate to say prompt engineering, but trying to get the right thing to do what you want is still frustrating to me. And it is like it reminds me of like when I first started to learn how to code, to be honest,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is a little funny, like in
But it's so
hindsight, right?
exciting. It's so much
It,
fun to
it's
bring that
it's
like excitement back, right?
it really is, yeah, and I don't know. Are there tools that you use for that, like, prompt design aspect, that you'd recommend to people?
I radical. I'm definitely kind of out there on the prompt design stuff. I, we've got an open source server for blueprints. We've got Sublayer is open source, so you can see the prompts that we're using. We're very minimal. Most of the prompt design for us, which I don't know if I've even, I guess maybe it's prompt design, but it's all about like what code are we going to give it and like making the problem easy. And so we haven't really used many tools because there's maybe 10 lines of prompt that we rely on. But I think thinking about it like programmers is helpful. That if you have you know we were talking a little bit about this of just like what makes code promptable. That if you have to say like I need this input, this input, this input, then do this other thing, and then do that, it's probably bad code. It's also probably not very promptable code. And like taking that further, if you're asking the LLM to do this and this and this and that, it's probably going to screw up somewhere. And so like break those apart the same way that you would much rather not have a 1,000 line method. You'd break it out into individual pieces that you can individually test, are individually reliable, and then piece those together.
Yeah, that's kind of my approach too. I do use like sometimes we'll use like the models against each other to
Oh yeah.
help build, right, and iterate on it, which is helpful. Like, how would you improve this, and then go to the other one and say, well, what do you think about that? Like, how would you improve this from? It's like they often will like it do better if you use the like a competing like model against the other, which is a little funny. And especially if you tell it like, oh, like you're in a competition to like make the best prompt, right? Like,
I was gonna say, can you like pit them against each other like clock?
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I haven't tried to like take the deep dive to be like, this is a matter of life or death, right? Like, and you can also win $1 million, right? Like,
Right.
just shove all of the prompt tricks, which is kind of funny. Like those are going away. Like, it's getting harder and harder to make those improvements work. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if they're doing that training or what, but
Yeah.
it's
Training
a
that out.
little funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that brings me to my next point. Like, Blueprint seems like it's like ripe for fine tuning, right? Like you have these pre-existing conditions and pre-existing formatting. It seems like this would make a great flow to fine tune the models to give the outputs in more desirable formats. Like, do you even see that as like being a meaningful improvement, or is it are the better like just you pay to use the better models at this point?
I mean, the my thinking right now is until we get to the end of this curve of the costs dropping. I think they drop by they quarter every 18 months or something like that. Where uh, it keeps getting cheaper and new models come out, which I think until that stops or slows down, to really just keep going. And I wrote a post a little while ago titled "Waste Inferences," which basically kind of that call, or just like we can actually build very simple applications and do very simple things, even if yeah, it costs a little bit more to use GPT 4.0 or Claude 3.5 today. But 6 months from now, it's going to cost half as much. And then 6 months from that, it's going to cost half as much as that. And so, like, if you over optimize today, that's time you could be spent. Time you could be spending finding new patterns for when these things cost nothing. I don't know if you remember. I mean, I remember early on, you used to get charged. Sure, some people still get charged for bandwidth, but like the like entry tier for any kind of web hosting was also a bandwidth charge. And like if somebody linked to an image on your site, you'd go bankrupt. But like I haven't seen anybody really talk about it's S3, but like the costs are so minuscule now that it's not even like called out.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember being on a call. There was like some kind of like I don't know, like presentation or something that a lot of the OpenAI engineers that were giving to a bunch of companies. I was lucky enough to join in,
Yeah.
and a lot of people were asking like, is fine tuning like worth it for these models? Like, and they're how do you get even like your pre-existing machine learning teams on board to start using this stuff, right? And what they were basically saying bluntly was like, the models are getting so good that fine tuning is really not going to be worth it over the long run in general. Uh, and that like basically it would be better for your like machine learning team even to get used to using the large language models than it would be to have them like, you know, do like machine learning to like for a recommendation system or something like that. Like over time, like you would be more advantageous to like basically get your foot in the door to the models and work through prompting than it would be to like get trained data on some kind of like uh, you know PyTorch or something like that for whatever you're trying to do. Like, because over the long run, you still have to maintain all that. Like, you have to worry about the same things. Like, is it being effective doing its job, right? And then also improving those aspects of it. Whereas the models themselves, like they already are improving themselves, and you can make it like you are, right? Like where you can get it to improve itself like iteratively.
Yeah.
um, and so it's interesting to see, you know, it's I'm kind of torn on it though, because I have worked with some fine tuning aspects to like get it to conform to a very specific outputs as an example,
Mhm.
and it does like perform much better for those like the
Right.
Obi's book is great like describing the narrow path, which is like
Mhm.
the perfect example of like how like all of this works really, right? It's like the smaller and narrower the scope you can make the task, like the better that it performs. And like, the problem with it now is like GPT-4 is like such a vast like knowledge base, right? That like it starts to perform poorly the greater the tasks that you ask of it or the more that you ask of it. So sure it can like start to distill and do a pretty great job most of the time, but like the more you start to like ask for like as an example like, you know, what which of these categories does this content fall into, right? It's going to make a lot of mistakes because you're asking it to like match up too many things at once, right? But if you're just like, well, is it this category, yes or no? It's like going to get almost 100% of the time,
Yeah.
right? And so like it's more thinking like those aspects of it, which is kind of funny because like the pricing model is like perfect for them, right? Like because the more that you use it, the more money they make, but also like the more that you need to use it, the times wise, right, starts to increase just by the nature of the design, which is kind of funny.
I just realized I probably should put a disclaimer on that waste
Right.
inference post, but I'm not being paid by any of these API companies or AI companies.
That's funny.
Um,
Um,
but I guess the one thing I would say on that, and like even to your question, and maybe could have started the should have said this a lot earlier. That like a lot of these things are so new, right? That like a lot of what we're doing is a lot of what we're doing. And there's a lot of papers coming out around a lot of these techniques, but I think everybody's just really, they have theories of why these things work. They can get it to work, and that might work for them. It might work for this. And there might be pieces of what people are doing that are right or wrong, but I don't think anybody knows for sure. And like, especially how uncertain the future is, that I think I think it's these opinions are mostly mine from the way that we're approaching it, and I could be completely wrong. I've seen successes and I have seen like evidence that we're right about some things, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a whole bunch of other techniques and patterns and ways to do it. Um, and so like at this also kind of terrifying that like nobody knows. Uh, but it's also super exciting, right? Like it's so fun to see, to like expand the way that you're thinking about it when you see somebody try something that you wouldn't have thought to try or tried and failed, and then see them succeed with it and expand your understanding of these things. So if something, for anybody that's listening, like if something interests you and like it's super easy to try out. So like don't let somebody saying like, oh, this doesn't work or this does work stop you from just trying it, because it's usually like a 2 cent API call to find out if your idea, if there's something there.
Yeah, for sure. Now has never been a greater time to experiment, because you can just prove people wrong so easily. Or prove yourself right, like,
Yeah.
it's very easy to test that out,
Yeah.
which is honestly great, with all the new tools that are out there. Which, perfect time to plug the Ruby AI Builders Discord, people just, like, drop in the wildest stuff, and you're like, "Oh, I could do that," like,
Yeah.
um, definitely come join us.
Yeah, it was a couple weeks ago, and somebody found that you could send it base 64 encoded information, and it would
Oh,
decode it
yeah.
and respond. And then so that was like a really fun thing we had like on a Friday night one night. I'm just like, why? How is it able to do this?
That's awesome. Yeah, I wonder if you can, like, skirt around some of the token issues,
Yeah,
compression, I don't know.
yeah.
Uh, I wonder if it makes, yeah, it any slower at responding. I haven't noticed.
No.
So I wanted to briefly touch on, you know, for those that don't know, you've, started hosting what seems to be a repeat, event in New York City,
Yes.
the Ruby AI meetup. How did you get started with that? Like, what prompted it? Like, I attended the last one. I thought it was really, really great to meet new Rubyists, like, in the AI space, but even non-Rubyists were there, which was pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that?
Phew. I've got a backstory, of course. So, you know, I one of the we got asked a lot, as we were building this startup, why Ruby? And I'm, as you can, maybe if you can see some of the books here, a little bit of a software historian, and really love looking and digging deep into like the reason for why we do what we do, and kind of realized that every time there's a new platform shift or new kind of thing we can do with computers, or as things change, there's kind of a pendulum swing, and you kind of see like object oriented programming and the GUI kind of coming out of Smalltalk, and then that's more of the informal kind of like fuzzy reasoning kind of approach, which then it got more formalized through like the 80s and 90s with like C++ and Java, and then database backed web applications became a thing, and we found that the dynamic languages Ruby, Python, JavaScript made it possible to test out a whole bunch of ideas and find the patterns and find what it means to have like these dynamic web applications. And then through the 2010s or so, it's become more formalized with TypeScript and Rust, and we're not really trying out all these different variations. We know what we want to build, and we want that to be stable and scalable. But now with LLMs, nobody knows, right? And so my thinking was, I need a dynamic language where it's going to get out of the way, and I can test out an interface, a DSL, an idea super quickly. And started thinking back to like when I was getting into Ruby, how there was just like this explosion of different gems, people trying things out, like Why the Lucky Stiff was putting things out, like rapid fire. And something like camping comes about, which inspires Sinatra. I don't know if this is direct, but in my mind, this is my headcanon, that camping inspires Sinatra, which inspires Flask and Express, which is like kind of what a lot of things are built on now. And we kind of are in that period now where like we want to bring people together, and kind of like what I said before, of just like, I don't know, maybe I'm right about some things and wrong about some things, but like we need to get together and share those ideas, bounce those ideas off each other, get into arguments, and like show each other cool stuff that we're building. And so that's where the happy hour came about. It was like I feel like Ruby is right for this. I feel like there is, you know, from talking to people one on one, there is definitely that feeling of like, where did that magic go? And so I was like, let's see if we can bring some Rubyists together in New York and you know, test that theory out. And so we did, and it was a huge. I feel like it was a huge success. Like, you know, got a chance to meet you. We had people coming from all over the East Coast to come to it. And yeah, got you know, we've sponsors for the next one coming up in July 24th. Test double infield fire hydrant. Saw the you know, saw the excitement, saw the energy, and yeah, we're trying to make the next one even bigger, bringing more people together. Yeah, I think you know, another headcanon. I don't know if this is exactly right. The story you hear about like GitHub starting was, you know, you know, happened at a booth at a sports bar after after a meetup where they were like, you know, we should try this. And I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know the conversation, but like that's the story you hear. And I, you know, wanted to try to, you know, make that, see if we can recreate some of that magic.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, I appreciate it. Like, I know a lot of people appreciate it. Like, yeah, that was the first Ruby event I've been to in quite a while. And just because it was close, and you know, like there wasn't, you know, it reminded me of the unconference tracks, right? Where, you know, they're just like, come hang out at a conference, like, and not go to any talk, and it like removes all of the barriers to like meet people, right? Like, which is kind of funny, because you go to pay for the conference so that you can listen to the talks. um
True.
but then they end up having, like, you know, somebody's just like, it ends up being like a lightning talks, but like side tracks, right? Which
Yeah.
is kind of funny. But it has that kind of like vibe to it, right? Where like people are just like talking about like all of their excitement, which is like, all this stuff is so exciting. And where do you start? And like, what are people working on? Like, you know, you don't know until, and like that, the meetup was like definitely the culmination of everybody just being like, here's what we're working on, like this is exciting, you know. And it was super cool to see.
That's awesome.
um so I'm looking forward to going again.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we can actually, I guess I can, I don't have the access to make comments, but I'll send this to you, the link to the event if anybody.
oh, awesome. Yep, we'll drop it in here. uh yeah, come join us. It's so much fun. And yeah, like you said, people traveled for it, you know. It was really cool to see.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, you don't realize like how, you know, how tough the last few years have been being, you know, remote and hybrid, that like you don't really get a chance to just like as much, I guess, anymore, just like meet and hang out. And um yeah, got a lot of feedback of just like that same, you know, your same comment of like, I haven't been to a Ruby event in a long time. I haven't, you know, haven't seen this many people at a Ruby event for years. But like there's definitely, you know, um, yeah, something we've lost by like going mostly remote and hybrid, that being in person kind of brings back, for me anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I remember my first RailsConf, or was it in Maryland? And yeah, it's definitely intimidating in a larger setting. And having smaller groups, you know, it definitely is easier to chat with people and socialize, I think. um
Yeah,
but
you know, one thing I think we had this moment when we first met. It was like, I know your name, but like I know you from the avatar in Discord.
right, right.
We have to find a way to bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if X just had like a, you know, print your avatar, like, I feel like a lot, it would make like, you know, these social connections easier to see.
Mhm.
Just slap that on. That's funny.
Good.
So where are you going next with this? Like, where's Sublayer heading? Where's Blueprints? Like, where do you see like your next phase in all of this?
I think the next thing, and with the topic of this is Ruby as a sleeping giant for AI application development. Like, I think it's we've kind of laid the foundation here with the framework, new version. I was trying to get the new version out last night, but I had a couple of things I had to do. Lay the foundation with the framework, lay the foundation with blueprints, and then really kind of show how easy it is to show and like spread the word of how easy it is to build these LLM powered applications that changes a lot of changes um, the way that we think about what's possible, right? I think there's still a lot of it's hard to go from a place where a project in 2018 even you're like, okay, that'll be about a team of like 15 people, it'll take a year or two to do, turning into like a 10-cent API call. Like that mindset, it's like it's wild, right? I'm sure you've experienced it with just like some of the things these models can do. And so really like our next steps are bringing more and more of that to you know, to the forefront of just like what are all of these things that you can do that take half a day to automate, where like previously you probably just ignored it because it was so costly and so boring and mind numbing. Um, and so building out the framework more, bringing more use cases to the forefront, and then expanding blueprints to make that even faster, so that more and more of these examples that you have, the more things it can do and more things it can generate. Um, and then we're also trying to experiment with the interactive docs piece, getting ready to roll out, kind of making it possible for anybody with API docs to have what we have in our docs. And see if there's interest there. So even if you're not on the forefront of like trying to turn $1 million projects into 10-cent API calls, you can still see some benefit today.
Yeah, you know what I would love to see is just being able to give like a GitHub link to like lines or something like that, and say like do something with this.
Mm,
I think that could make a really cool like example of, hey, like here are the lines to some code, like you know change this or something, or make it say something silly. I don't know.
yeah,
uh, I don't know. Yeah, like there's so much stuff you could do like that. Like it's so easy. Yeah, I would love to see more like more ease of use, right? Like
yeah,
it's already easy, but like still people don't, know where to start. Uh, which is a little bizarre at the same time, right? Like it is as easy as just typing, right?
right.
I hate to like distill it down to just that, but like uh, at this point you could just go to like, Microsoft.com and like use ChatGPT for free, like um it is that easy to get started. Which unfortunately you gotta buy into that.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, and I think there's one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is how to. I've been trying with that example of like, you're already doing RAG. RAG is just you googling for like the docs, finding the docs, and using it in your and using it in your task. That like, I feel like there are a lot of like very big, scary, like technical terms that when you're getting ready to do a side project, it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to like read all these docs to figure out what these things mean. When like what they really mean is like put an example in the prompt, or like in context learning, it's just like give some examples in the prompt, right? And
Right.
and it figures out how to do it. Like that, I think like that simplification, I really want to try to find or work with people to help find, because been talking about this with like Rails, where there used to be like, oh, you have to know all of this stuff about like database normalization and third normal form and this and that, but it really boils down to, oh, you mean like customers have many purchases? Got it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think there are that I think is one of the things that's going to need to happen next, of just like the like easier description, like distill this down. There's you know, there's very deep, you know, deep explanations to take it further and make it more and more powerful. But to like get started, it's just like, oh, you mean you like just copy and paste that into the
Right. Yeah, the dummy's guide to prompting. But to be honest, like I never understood why like they came up with the phrases they did, like zero shot or few shot. Like, what does all that mean? Like, it's almost like nonsensical to like say that when you just mean examples, right? Like, or not examples. Like,
I
uh,
think that's yeah, I think that's one of the things that been talking about with Andre and I have been talking. Andre from Langchain RB have been talking about is that a lot of this stuff is coming out of research and coming out of academia, and like those things, those terms do matter for like those domains, but from an application engineering side of things that are more like applied, we can have our own descriptions of these and why they work, and that are separate from the science and the theory and more of the practice, right? Like what's the in theory there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is.
well, is there anything else you wanted to cover today before we jump in the picks here?
Yeah, well, if anybody listening is going to Madison Ruby, I'm going to be giving a talk going more into using LLMs in a little bit of the philosophy on how to deal with LLM generated code. The talk's called Going Postel. Won't give any spoilers away, but leaning very heavily, which Obi talks about Postel's law in his book. But building your systems so that they can be liberal in what they accept, and conservative in what they send. Being just a little bit more liberal in what you accept than what you're used to. And then there's a lot of things that Ruby can do easily. Any language can do anything, right? But like the metaprogramming things that you can do in Ruby to change your application at runtime, I think are underexplored. So be going into that a lot at the talk.
That's awesome. Yeah, I share your your sentiment there. I've definitely tried to have the LLM generate Ruby methods and run them, and then reuse them. It's a lot of fun, very dangerous, but a lot of fun. But yeah, definitely underexplored for sure. So that's cool. Yeah, people go check out Madison Ruby if you're not going. I'm excited to watch that talk remotely at least.
Yeah,
thanks. Hear what you got. So if people want to reach out to you or find you on the web, where can they do that?
Sublayer.com, primary, Scott at sublayer.com. If you'd like to email me, at scottwernerd or at Twitter, scottwernerd at Twitter. And let's see, we've all, I'm also, like we talked about in the Ruby AI Builders Discord, sharing, we discussion, the big discussions right now are on that ARC AGI challenge, which we've all been kind of racking our brains about. And then, let's see if I have a link here. On the Sublayer site, we have an access to our Discord, which is a little bit more, about our releases and maybe some less Ruby specific stuff and more kind of the thinking on how do we think about these AI tools and use them for building applications just in general.
Yeah, I've been enjoying that channel as well. It's super interesting the stuff that gets posted, and you would think it would get shared in more places.
Right.
To be honest, a lot of the papers that get shared, maybe people just aren't reading as much as I am. I don't know. I don't think so, but
it feels like there's an unlimited amount of stuff to read.
There's so much to read.
I wake up every morning like, where did I fall behind?
Right? Yeah, I feel like the paper I read last week is just like already like, dated. Like
That's
it's
wild.
like how is that possible?
I know.
Uh, all right. Well, let's jump into picks. We've been talking about so much great stuff. Picks is our segment where we just pick literally anything. It could be code if you want to. It doesn't have to be, but it's typically what I pick. Um, and if you need a minute, I can go first. So I've decided to fine tune a large language model for Ruby. Uh, mostly just for the experiment than anything. But I'm calling it rubylang.ai. I'm gonna start building it in open and just like learning how all this stuff works and how it might be used to source all of the awesome open source Ruby that's out there that is designed incredibly, and make use of that and take advantage of it, and
Awesome.
make a new language model that is very Ruby centric. So I'm going to see how it goes. I'm hoping that I'm successful in it, but I may not be. There may just be a bunch of lessons learned. But we'll see. You can follow my progress rubylang.ai. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I saw that you posted about it either yesterday or the day before, and yeah, excited to see where that goes.
yeah, I got this stupid massive GPU server at home, and I was just using it for inference. And I'm like, I'm just wasting away over here of like running inference on it. And so I thought, like, I should fine tune something, and
Right.
this seems like a perfect use case. So here we
That's
go.
awesome. Oh, that's great. Yeah, so I guess I got two things. One, the I talked a little bit around like the formal informal kind of pendulum swing. One of the places where I got that from was an Avdi Grimm talk, The Soul of Software, from I guess it was a long time ago at this point. But it's there are a couple versions of it up on YouTube. He goes into more of the kind of the informal mindset and how there are those two splits of software, and how neither one is particularly absolutely right, but more it's uh, each one gives you different things depending on what you need. And so like that was very impactful for me, especially now given the approach we're taking. And the other thing, read a lot of Substacks, and there's one called Strange Loop Canon, which he had a post a little while back about what LLMs can't do, which is also a trap a lot of times, because as soon as you say it's not possible to do this, everybody on Twitter tries to prove you wrong. And in his post, he had one about it can't do Conway's Game of Life, and I think like within a week somebody had proven him wrong. He had tried fine tuning all these different things, couldn't figure it out, and the collective wisdom of Twitter came up with a solution, I think. But then he has one recent
That's awesome.
this it's very good. I highly recommend just the Substack in general. That one was very good, and then this latest one, Seeing Like a Network, is was very good as well.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Scott, and talking about all this code generation stuff and the love of Ruby AI. And it definitely is a sleeping giant, and I think we're just going to see more and more of why that is. Um, and we'll have to have you on again after you start creating many companies metalize with all of this Ruby code generation. I could definitely foresee a future where you're just like, oh, create a Rails app that does this, and it just does it.
Yeah,
Seems easy enough.
it's simple. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. It's been awesome, chatting and catching up, and excited to see you in person in about a month.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, until next time, folks, I'm out of here, and come visit us next time.